The late summer sun was sinking low over the rolling farmland, just outside a quiet Illinois town, painting the horizon in hues of amber and violet. The air carried the thick smell of soil, freshly turned after days of hard work. Ethan Walker leaned on his shovel, sweat dampening the collar of his work shirt, and glanced toward his two companions. Marcus Hill, with his ever-present curiosity, was brushing dirt from his hands, while Caleb Reed, solid and focused, pushed the blade of his shovel deep into the ground. They had been working for hours, trying to clear an old plot of land that hadn't seen use in decades. Caleb's shovel struck something with a metallic thud. The sound was sharper, heavier than stone, and it cut through the ordinary rhythm of digging like a bell tolling. The three men froze. Caleb pulled back, his brow furrowing. "That wasn't rock," he muttered, kneeling down. He scraped the soil aside, revealing the edge of a corroded metal sheet embedded just beneath the surface. Ethan crouched down, brushing dirt with his calloused hands, and his pulse quickened. "This isn't junk," Ethan said quietly. "It's something bigger." Marcus stepped closer, his eyes brightening with the thrill of discovery. "What if it's a storage bunker? Or an old storm shelter? People built them back in the 50s all the time." Ethan shook his head slowly. The more soil they pulled away, the clearer it became. The metal wasn't a lid or a container. It was the corner of a roof. His stomach tightened. "Guys," Ethan whispered, "this is a house." The word hung heavy in the twilight air. A house, buried alive under 70 years of soil, hidden as though someone had deliberately erased it from memory. Caleb pressed his lips together, his face unreadable, while Marcus let out a disbelieving laugh. "A whole house? Buried out here in the middle of nowhere?" Marcus's voice carried both awe and unease. Ethan stood, brushing dirt from his jeans, but his hands trembled. "We should stop. This isn't just a curiosity. Someone went to a lot of trouble to hide this." Caleb's gaze hardened. "Or to protect it, which makes me want to know even more." The three men exchanged a long, weighted silence. The farmland stretched out around them, quiet, but charged with an invisible tension. A house beneath the earth was no ordinary discovery. It was a story waiting to be told, a secret someone had tried desperately to keep. And right here, at the very beginning of this mystery, I want to pause to invite you to subscribe to this channel. Because what we're about to uncover is more than just an old house in the ground. It's a journey into the heart of forgotten history, one that will keep you questioning until the very end. Ethan tried to ground himself in logic. "Let's call it in. Sheriff's Department, maybe the county. We are not supposed to mess with something like this." Marcus's response was instant. "No. If we report it now, they'll seal it off, and we'll never know what's inside. This could be historically important, don't you see? A family once lived here. Their whole lives are still down there." Caleb nodded slowly, his jaw set. "He's right. We can't walk away. Not yet." Ethan hesitated. Responsibility weighed heavily on him, always had since his father's passing. He had built a life on order, rules, things that made sense. But staring at the roofline just beneath the dirt, he felt something shift inside. Curiosity clawed at him, even as unease rooted him in place. "Fine," Ethan muttered. "We'll dig, but carefully. No heavy equipment. If this thing's been buried for 70 years, it could collapse." The three men returned to their work with renewed urgency, their shovels striking into the earth in steady rhythm. Every scrape pulled them closer to something that had been hidden from the world for generations. With each inch uncovered, the questions deepened. Who buried a house? Why? And what would they find sealed inside after all these years? As darkness settled over the farmland and the first stars appeared overhead, Ethan felt a chill, despite the lingering warmth of the day. He glanced at Marcus and Caleb, both too absorbed in their task to notice the shift in his expression. For the first time in a long while, Ethan Walker felt truly unsettled, as if the ground itself was whispering that they had crossed a line that could not be undone. The discovery was only beginning, and none of them could have imagined how far the truth would pull them. The night after their discovery, Ethan lay awake in his modest two-story house on the edge of town, staring at the ceiling fan circling slowly above. The sound of Caleb's shovel striking metal replayed in his mind like a drumbeat he couldn't silence. Every logical thought told him to walk away, to let the county handle it, but something deeper stirred. His house buried under the earth wasn't an accident. It was a story, one that demanded to be told, even if he wasn't sure he wanted to hear it. By morning he drove back to the farmland, the gravel road crunching beneath his truck tires. Marcus's car was already parked near the edge of the field, dust clinging to the paint. Caleb's pickup sat beside it, mud splattered across the tires. The two men were already waiting, standing near the half-exposed roofline. Marcus greeted Ethan with a grin that revealed both excitement and nerves. "Did you sleep?" "Because I couldn't. I kept thinking about what's under there. This isn't just a random find. This could rewrite a piece of local history." Ethan frowned. "Or it could be nothing but rotten old beams. We don't know what we're dealing with, and I'm telling you, we should at least notify somebody before we go any further." Caleb crossed his arms, his stance firm. "Notify who? The sheriff? The county clerk? You know what happens if we do. They'll tape it off, claim it as property of the state, and we'll never see what's inside. Do you want them to bury it again under paperwork this time?" The wind swept through the cornstalks at the edge of the field, carrying a dry whisper that made the silence between them stretch longer than it should have. Ethan shifted uneasily. He had never liked standing at the center of decisions like this, where the weight of consequence pressed against every choice. Marcus's tone softened. "Ethan, think about it. Someone once lived here, a family. They cooked, laughed, maybe even argued in this house. And then one day, everything was covered up. Don't you want to know why?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "Of course I want to know. But I also know how dangerous this could be. That soil's been compacted for decades. One wrong move, and the whole structure could cave in. We're not talking about a backyard project." Caleb's eyes narrowed, the lines around them deepening. "We've all faced worse risks. At least this one could mean something. Look, I don't care about the danger. I care about answers." The three men stood in a tense triangle, none of them willing to back down. The sun was climbing higher, casting harsh light across the land, but the air felt heavy as though the ground itself waited for their decision. Finally, Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "If we do this, we do it carefully. No bulldozers, no shortcuts. Shovels and patience. And if anything feels unsafe, we stop." "Agreed." Marcus nodded eagerly. "Agreed." Caleb gave a short grunt. "Fine by me." Reluctantly, Ethan picked up his shovel. The metal felt cold against his palms despite the heat of the day. With the first thrust into the earth, it felt as though a silent pact had been sealed between them. They weren't just uncovering a buried house. They were stepping into a story none of them yet understood. The hours passed slowly, each scoop of dirt revealing more of the structure. The soil was dense, packed tight as if pressed deliberately by machinery long ago. Sweat rolled down Ethan's back, soaking through his shirt. His muscles ached, but the rhythm of digging kept him focused, even as doubt gnawed at him. Marcus hummed tunelessly, lost in thought, while Caleb worked with the precision of a man who had spent his life following orders and routines. Together, they cleared enough earth to reveal a chimney, its bricks still solid, though weathered by time. Ethan leaned on his shovel, breathing heavily. This wasn't natural. Whoever buried this didn't want it found. The word sent a ripple through the group. Marcus's excitement dimmed for a moment, replaced by the shadow of unease. Caleb's gaze sharpened, scanning the farmland as though expecting eyes to be watching. "We keep going," Caleb said firmly, breaking the silence. And though Ethan wanted to argue, he knew deep down the choice had already been made the moment Caleb's shovel first struck metal. Whatever secrets lay beneath them, they were committed now. The next morning brought with it a haze of heat and the smell of damp earth. Ethan, Marcus, and Caleb returned to the site earlier than usual, each carrying the weight of restless nights. The air was thick with anticipation as their shovels cut into the soil, striking through layers that had long kept secrets hidden. Every movement seemed to echo with a question none of them could answer. Marcus paused, wiping his forehead with the back of his arm. His shirt clung to him in patches, and his breathing was uneven, though his eyes carried a spark that only grew brighter with each uncovered inch. "Do you feel it?" he asked suddenly, his voice pitched with awe. "Like we're opening a time capsule. This isn't just digging, it's peeling back history itself." Ethan didn't reply immediately. His hands were steady, but inside unease pressed against his ribs. He was a man who believed in solid ground, in things that made sense, and yet here they were, revealing a house that had been deliberately hidden from the world. "Or we're opening something that was meant to stay closed," he muttered, his tone laced with caution. Caleb thrust his shovel into the dirt with deliberate force. "History doesn't get to stay buried forever. Whoever hid this didn't count on us being here." By midday, the shape of the roofline became clearer. Weathered shingles, surprisingly intact beneath decades of soil, stretched out before them. A brick chimney rose slightly askew, like a stubborn memory refusing to collapse. They worked in silence for long stretches, broken only by the scrape of metal against earth and the occasional grunt of exertion. At one point, Ethan crouched low, brushing soil away with his gloved hand. The texture shifted suddenly. Beneath the dirt lay wooden beams, dry and brittle yet still holding form. He froze, a chill cutting through the heat around him. "It's real," he whispered. "Not just fragments, it's the whole house." Marcus knelt beside him, eyes wide. "Can you imagine what's inside? Furniture, clothes, maybe letters. It's like a window into another life." Ethan shook his head, unwilling to let Marcus's excitement sweep him up. It could be unstable, the foundation might be compromised. One wrong move and we could bring the whole thing down on ourselves. Caleb studied the beams, his brow furrowed. "Then we go slow. Patience. No shortcuts." The soil wasn't just heavy, it was compacted as if machines had pressed it down deliberately. The effort wore on their bodies, but each new reveal fed a fire inside them that outweighed exhaustion. The house wasn't just a structure, it was becoming a presence, a silent witness pressing its story into their hands. As they dug near what appeared to be a window frame, Marcus stopped abruptly. He leaned closer, holding his breath. The faintest whisper of air slipped through a gap in the soil, stale and cold against the heat of the day. He pulled back, shivering. "Did you feel that?" Like the house just exhaled. Ethan felt it too, but refused to admit it aloud. He tightened his grip on the shovel and returned to work. Rational explanations were his shield, though unease gnawed at him. The three men continued into the afternoon, their clothes streaked with mud, their arms heavy with fatigue, and yet none of them suggested stopping. The farther they went, the more impossible it became to turn back. Finally, as shadows stretched across the field, they stepped back to look at their progress. Nearly an entire wall was visible now, with siding weathered but still intact. The house stood silent, half revealed, a reminder that what they uncovered could change everything they thought they knew about the land they worked. Marcus broke the silence. "We can't stop now, we're too close." Ethan's gaze lingered on the dark outline of the window, soil still pressed against the glass. For a moment, he thought he saw movement inside, though he knew it was nothing more than light and shadow playing tricks. He shook his head quickly, unwilling to let imagination blur reality. Still, as they packed up their tools for the night, Ethan couldn't escape the sense that the house itself was waiting, holding secrets just beyond their reach. The air carried a weight that pressed into his chest, whispering that the deeper they dug, the less chance they had of walking away unchanged. The following day dawned overcast, the sky a pale sheet of grey that promised rain but withheld it. The air was heavy, pressing down on the farmland as if nature itself disapproved of what the three men were doing. Ethan felt that weight deep in his chest as he tightened the straps on his work gloves. He had never been one for superstition, yet every time his eyes landed on the half-exposed structure, unease stirred like a restless animal. Marcus was already kneeling at the side of the house, clearing soil away from what looked like a window frame. His movements were careful, almost reverent, as though he were unwrapping a fragile artifact. "It's intact," he whispered, brushing away dirt to reveal glass clouded with grime and condensation. Caleb crouched beside him, resting his forearm on his knee. "That's not possible. 70 years under dirt, and the window's still here." Marcus glanced back at Ethan, his eyes wide with wonder. Look. How you can almost see inside. Ethan knelt reluctantly, pressing his palm against the cool, dirty glass. Shapes lurked behind the fogged pane, faint outlines of furniture frozen in stillness. His throat tightened. He couldn't make out details, but he knew instinctively what he was seeing. This wasn't an empty shell. The house still held its story within its walls. Caleb leaned closer, shielding his eyes from the glare. There's something on the other side, a table maybe, or chairs. Can't tell for sure. Marcus's voice trembled with excitement. Do you realize what this means? It's preserved. Everything inside might still be there, waiting for us. This isn't just a discovery, it's like stepping into a time machine. Ethan pulled back sharply, his tone colder than he intended. Or it's a tomb. Think about it. Why would someone bury an entire house? People don't do that unless they want it forgotten. The words hung in the thick air, and for a long moment none of them spoke. The truth of Ethan's warning weighed on them. But curiosity pressed harder than caution, and Marcus's eyes refused to leave the glass. He reached for his phone, shining a small light against the pane. Dust sparkled within the beam, but the shadows inside remained stubbornly opaque. Still, for the briefest second, Ethan thought he saw something metallic glint deep within the room. He blinked, and it was gone. Caleb exhaled slowly, straightening up. One step at a time, let's not jump ahead. We've confirmed the house is intact. That's enough for today. But Marcus shook his head, brushing more soil from the window frame with trembling fingers. No, this isn't enough. We need to see more. We can't stop now. Ethan stepped back, scanning the house half buried in earth. The silence of it unnerved him. No birds sang near the site. No insects buzzed. It was as if the land itself recoiled from the structure. He rubbed his temples, trying to quiet the storm of conflicting feelings. Logic told him to walk away, but something deeper, something unspoken, bound him to this place. The sun dipped lower, streaking the grey sky with dim bands of orange. They had spent hours circling the structure, tracing its edges beneath the soil, yet the window remained their most tangible connection to what lay within. The faint shapes pressed behind the glass haunted Ethan's mind. As they gathered their tools, Marcus lingered near the window, whispering almost to himself, "There's a family in there, I can feel it. Their lives, their stories, they're waiting for us." Caleb rested a firm hand on his shoulder. "Not tonight. We'll come back. When we're ready." Ethan turned his gaze toward the horizon, though the weight of the house followed him. He knew Marcus was right about one thing. Whatever was inside hadn't been destroyed. It had been sealed, preserved, waiting. And that realization chilled him more than anything else they had uncovered so far. Because a house left behind is one thing, but a house deliberately buried, that carried meaning. A secret someone thought the earth itself could hold forever. Word about the buried house spread faster than any of the men expected. By the end of the week, whispers ran through the small town like wildfire. Farmers at the diner leaned across chipped countertops to share rumors. Cashiers at the grocery store lowered their voices when strangers walked in, and students at the high school repeated fragments of stories they barely understood. The farmland that had been forgotten for decades suddenly became the town's greatest source of unease. Marcus sat at a corner booth in the diner, his notebook open beside his untouched coffee. He had already filled pages with sketches, questions, and speculations about the family that might have lived in the house. He scribbled furiously, so wrapped up in his thoughts that he barely noticed Claire Thompson approaching. Claire slid into the seat across from him, setting her recorder on the table. She was sharp-eyed, always 2 steps ahead in conversation, and known in town for pursuing stories most people preferred to leave alone. "So," she said, her tone measured, "I hear you and your friends dug up something that doesn't belong in the ground." Marcus stiffened, his pen pausing mid-sentence. "News travels fast, huh? In a place like this? Faster than light." Claire studied him carefully. "Tell me, Marcus, what exactly did you find?" Marcus hesitated. His instincts as a teacher and history lover wanted to share everything, But another part of him, the cautious part, remembered Ethan's warnings. "We're not sure yet," he said finally, "but it's a house, buried intact. Looks like it's been there since the early 50s. Claire's expression sharpened. "And you're planning to keep digging without reporting it?" Before Marcus could answer, Ethan walked into the diner, his presence steady and grounding as always. He slid into the booth beside Marcus, eyeing Claire with polite wariness. "We're being careful, and no, we haven't made any decisions about what happens next." Claire leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Careful isn't enough. Something like this could change everything we know about this town. Or it could expose things people would rather keep quiet. You need to understand, once this is public, you won't be able to control the story." Ethan's jaw tightened. "That's exactly why we're keeping it quiet, at least for now." Across town, Caleb had chosen a different route. He stopped by the hardware store to pick up supplies, only to find himself cornered by Mr. Dawson, one of the oldest residents of the county. Dawson's weathered hands gripped his cane tightly, his pale eyes locking onto Caleb's with unsettling intensity. "You boys should leave that place alone," Dawson said without preamble. His voice was low, rough with age, but steady. Caleb narrowed his gaze. "Why, you know something about it?" Dawson shook his head slowly. "Some things are better left where they belong. That house, it was buried for a reason. Don't go chasing answers that will only bring trouble." Caleb leaned in, his voice hard. "We've already started. If you know something, you need to say it. Keeping quiet doesn't protect anyone." But Dawson only tapped his cane against the floor and turned away, muttering, "Silence has kept this town alive longer than truth ever could." That evening, the three men met back at Ethan's place. Marcus relayed his conversation with Claire, and Caleb recounted Dawson's cryptic warning. The living room was tense, shadows from the lamp stretching across their tired faces. Marcus broke the silence first. "They're scared of it. Dawson, the town, even Claire. But why? Why would a house buried 70 years ago still matter today?" Ethan rubbed his temples. "Because secrets don't die just because time passes, they get heavier." Caleb's voice was firm, steady. "Which means we're digging up more than just dirt." The three men exchanged heavy looks, each one realizing that their discovery was no longer just theirs. The town was watching now. Some wanted the truth uncovered, others wanted it buried again. But either way, the ground had shifted beneath their feet and there was no turning back. The field was quiet when the three men returned at dawn, mist curling low along the ground like a veil reluctant to lift. Ethan carried the weight of unease in his chest, while Marcus's restless energy buzzed with anticipation. Caleb, steady as stone, said little, but his eyes never stopped scanning the site as if expecting resistance from the land itself. They had cleared enough of the back wall to reveal a door, its frame warped by years of pressure yet still intact. The wood was swollen with moisture, darkened to nearly black, but the brass handle clung stubbornly in place. For a long moment, none of them moved. The door was no longer just an object, it was a threshold, a line between the known world and the buried past. Marcus broke the silence, his voice trembling with excitement. "This is it. After all the digging, after all the waiting, we're about to step into history." Ethan placed a hand on the handle, but pulled back almost instantly. The metal was ice cold, unnaturally so for a summer morning. His pulse raced. "If we open this, there's no going back. We need to be ready for whatever's inside." Caleb's tone was firm, controlled. "We'll handle it, just slow and steady." Together they wedged a crowbar against the swollen frame, pushing with careful force until the wood groaned, splitting at the seams. The sound echoed across the farmland, a cry that seemed too alive for something so long buried. Finally, with one last shove, the door creaked open, releasing a breath of air trapped for 70 years. The smell hit them first, stale, thick, tinged with mildew and the faint sweetness of decayed wood. Ethan coughed, covering his mouth with his sleeve, while Marcus leaned forward with wide eyes. "Do you smell that? It's like time itself just spilled out." They stepped inside cautiously, flashlights cutting through the gloom. Dust hung in the air like ash, swirling with every movement. The silence was so complete, It pressed against their ears, broken only by the crunch of dirt beneath their boots. Ethan swept his light across the first room, and his stomach tightened. A living room lay preserved before them, a couch draped in a lace blanket, an armchair angled toward a cold, empty fireplace, a coffee table with a porcelain vase toppled on its side. The details felt wrong in their perfection, as if the family had left in the middle of their lives and never returned. Marcus whispered, his voice reverent. "It's like they just walked out yesterday." Caleb's jaw clenched, his instincts sharpening. "Or like someone didn't want them found." Ethan approached the fireplace, running his fingers along the mantel thick with dust. Picture frames lined the surface, their glass clouded but intact. He wiped one clean and froze. A smiling family stared back at him, a man in a suit, a woman with neatly curled hair, 2 children clutching wooden toys. Their eyes, forever frozen in black and white, seemed to pierce through time. "They were real," Ethan murmured. This was their home. Marcus leaned in close, studying the photograph with intensity. "We need to know who they were. Names, dates, something that tells us why this place was buried." But Caleb remained near the doorway, his shoulders stiff. He scanned the room as if waiting for something to move, his hand brushing instinctively against the pocket knife clipped to his belt. "Don't get carried away," he warned. "This isn't just history, it's a grave." The flashlight beams cut deeper into the room, revealing dust-coated curtains, shelves lined with books, and a rug worn thin beneath layers of soil. Every detail told a story, yet none explained why the house had been entombed. As they stood in that still room, the weight of the silence pressed harder. Each man felt it differently, Marcus as wonder, Ethan as dread, Caleb as suspicion. But all 3 understood one truth. They had crossed a boundary that could not be undone. Outside, the farmland stretched in quiet indifference. Inside, the air was heavy with memory, as though the house itself had been waiting for someone to return. Dust swirled around their boots as the 3 men stepped deeper into the house. The air carried the faint sweetness of mold, mingling with a sharp tang of rust that clung to their throats. Ethan's flashlight beam skimmed across the walls, illuminating faded wallpaper patterned with tiny flowers, the colors dulled but still clinging stubbornly to the plaster. Time hadn't destroyed this place. It had only paused it. Marcus moved ahead, his light darting from object to object like a child in a museum. He knelt near a wooden toy car, its paint chipped but unmistakably handmade. He picked it up with trembling hands. "A child played with this," he whispered. "Can you imagine? 70 years ago, a kid sat right here, pushing this across the floor." Ethan felt the weight of the moment press against him. He didn't want to imagine it. The thought of laughter echoing through the room, now replaced by silence and dust, unsettled him more than he cared to admit. "Put it back, Marcus," he said quietly. "It belongs here." Caleb, standing near a bookshelf, pulled out a yellowed newspaper. The headline read April 1953. The ink faded but legible. "Look at this," he said, handing it over. "This house was sealed not long after this date. Whatever happened, happened around then." Ethan scanned the front page, his heart beating faster. Stories of Cold War tension, a local factory strike, and a missing persons report filled the pages. The missing woman's name caught his eye. Margaret Ellis, 34. He frowned, uneasy with how the details seemed to tug at invisible threads. Marcus leaned over his shoulder. "Do you think she lived here?" Ethan shook his head. "We don't know that. Could be coincidence." "Don't jump to conclusions." But even as he said it, the photograph of the smiling family on the mantel returned to his mind. A woman with curled hair, eyes bright with life. Was it her? Caleb folded the paper carefully and slid it back onto the shelf. His voice was low, controlled. "Coincidence or not, this place is a snapshot of a moment when something went wrong." They moved into the kitchen where dishes still sat in the cabinets, some chipped, others pristine. The table was set with plates dulled by a layer of grime, as if a meal had been prepared but never eaten. Marcus pulled out a chair, its legs scraping against the linoleum with a sound that made Ethan flinch. "This is unreal," Marcus breathed. "They left everything behind. Why would anyone walk away like this? Ethan's voice hardened, though it carried the tremor of unease. Maybe they didn't walk away. Maybe someone forced them out, and then someone buried it all to make sure no one remembered. The idea hung between them, heavier than the air. In a small bedroom at the back of the house, Marcus found a dresser with a cracked mirror. Inside the top drawer were children's clothes, tiny shirts and socks folded neatly, untouched for decades. He held one up, his throat tightening. There was a little boy here, maybe a girl too. They had a life, Ethan, and it was taken from them. Ethan stared at the fragile fabric, his chest tightening. He thought of his own father, of the generations that built their lives on land and sweat, and the idea of losing it all in silence struck him like a blow. Caleb stood at the doorway, arms crossed, his voice steady but grim. Then the question isn't just what happened. It's why did no one talk about it? Ethan glanced back toward the living room, where the family's photograph watched from the mantel. Their smiles, preserved in black and white, seemed too alive, too present, for a family erased so thoroughly. His voice was almost a whisper. We need to find out who they were. And as the silence of the buried house pressed against them once more, they knew this was only the beginning of a deeper truth waiting to surface. The following Monday, Ethan walked into the county clerk's office with a tight knot in his stomach. The building smelled faintly of paper and polish, its beige walls lined with filing cabinets that seemed to stretch back in time. He approached the front desk, where a middle-aged clerk adjusted her glasses and gave him a polite but wary smile. "Can I help you?" she asked. Ethan cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. "Yeah, I'm looking for property records, old ones. I need to know if there was ever a house registered on Dawson's farmland, out by Mill Creek Road." The clerk tapped at her keyboard, then disappeared into the back room. Minutes passed before she returned with a thick folder. "Here you go, but that land was listed as agricultural use since 1954. No residences recorded." Ethan frowned, flipping through the faded documents. Deeds, tax statements, surveys, everything pointed to farmland, uninterrupted and ordinary. "That doesn't make sense," he muttered. "We've uncovered a whole house out there." The clerk raised her brows. "A house? Buried?" Her tone carried a mix of disbelief and curiosity. "Well, if it's not in the records, then someone went to a lot of trouble to erase it." Later that day, Marcus sat hunched over stacks of newspapers in the town library, his notebook already filling with frantic scribbles. Claire Thompson had joined him, curiosity gleaming in her eyes. "You're serious about this," she said, flipping through microfilm reels as the projector hummed. Most people would have given up the moment the clerk said there was no record. Marcus looked up, eyes tired but alive with determination. "That's exactly why we can't give up. A whole family lived in that house. We saw their pictures, their belongings. If the records say it never existed, that means someone buried more than just the building. They buried the truth." Claire leaned closer. "And the question is why? Who would benefit from erasing an entire family?" He hesitated before answering. "That's what scares me, because if someone had the power to erase them back then, maybe their influence still lingers today." Meanwhile, Caleb lingered at the site, guarding it from prying eyes. Rumors had already started drawing curious locals, some sneaking onto the farmland to catch a glimpse of the buried house. He stood with arms crossed, watching a pair of teenagers retreat after spotting his silhouette. His mind returned to Mr. Dawson's words, that warning spoken with the weight of a lifetime. When Ethan and Marcus returned that evening, they found Caleb leaning against his truck, gaze hard. "People are talking. Too much. We won't be able to keep this quiet much longer." Ethan opened the folder he'd taken from the clerk's office, spreading the papers across the truck's hood. According to this, the land was always farmland, no house, no family. "Nothing." Marcus slammed his notebook shut in frustration. "That's impossible. We've been inside it. We've seen their lives." Caleb studied the documents, his expression unreadable. "Then it means the records were altered. Someone wanted this wiped clean." Claire pulled up just then, stepping out of her car with a file tucked under her arm. "And I might know why. I've been digging too. Found whispers of corruption tied to land development in the early 50s, deals that were made behind closed doors. Families who resisted disappeared from the records. Ethan stared at her, his pulse quickening. "Are you saying this wasn't just forgotten? It was intentional?" Claire nodded, her eyes unwavering. That house wasn't buried by accident. It was buried to erase evidence. And whoever did it, they wanted to make sure no one ever asked questions. The group fell silent, the farmland stretching dark behind them. The house loomed half exposed, its shadow rising like an accusation. And in that silence, one truth became undeniable. They weren't just unearthing history anymore. They were pulling at threads someone had once cut deliberately, and the whole fabric of the town's past was beginning to unravel. The following days brought a change in the air around Mill Creek Road. What had begun as a secret among three men now rippled through town like a storm cloud gathering strength. Cars slowed along the gravel path to steal glances, and more than once Ethan spotted footprints near the site that didn't belong to them. The buried house had become a magnet, pulling curiosity and danger alike. Caleb arrived early one morning to find two teenagers prying at the wooden boards around the window they had uncovered. His voice boomed across the field, startling them. "Off my land!" "Now!" The boys scrambled, tripping over the fence as they ran. Caleb watched them disappear into the distance, his chest tight with irritation. He knew this was only the beginning. When Ethan and Marcus joined him, Caleb wasted no time. "We can't keep this unguarded. Word's out. If kids are bold enough to sneak in, what's next? Looters? Reporters?" Marcus adjusted his glasses nervously, notebook clutched under his arm. "They're curious, Caleb, just like us. You can't expect people to ignore something like this." Caleb's jaw tightened. Curiosity is one thing, trespassing is another. This isn't just history anymore, it's a battleground. Later that afternoon, a black SUV pulled up near the site. Two men in suits stepped out, their shoes unsuited for the dirt path. They introduced themselves as representatives from the county, though neither offered identification. Ethan met them halfway across the field, unease prickling his skin. One of the men, tall and sharp-eyed, said evenly, "We've been informed of some activity out here. Excavation, possibly dangerous. You'll need to stop immediately until proper permits are filed." Ethan kept his tone steady. "We're not excavating with machines, just digging carefully by hand." "That doesn't matter," the second man interrupted, his voice colder. "The county doesn't recognize a structure on this property, which means you're tampering with land that isn't yours to disturb." Caleb stepped forward, his frame imposing. "This is private farmland. We're not breaking any laws." The tall man's gaze hardened. "Then consider this friendly advice. Stop digging. Some places are better left untouched." Without another word, they turned back to their vehicle and drove off, leaving dust swirling in their wake. Marcus broke the silence, his voice low but urgent. "Did you hear that? They're not county officials, they never even gave names." Ethan's stomach churned. "Which means someone doesn't want this uncovered, and they're willing to intimidate us to make sure of it." That evening, the three men gathered at Ethan's kitchen table, the air thick with tension. Claire joined them, notebook in hand, eyes sharp with concern. "You were warned," she said after hearing the story. "That SUV wasn't about safety. It was about control. Somebody out there doesn't want the truth about this house to surface." Marcus tapped his pen against the table, restless. "But why? What's so dangerous about an old house and a family that disappeared?" Claire leaned closer. "Because buried houses don't stay buried without reason. If this was tied to corruption back in the 50s, then whoever profited from it had power, and maybe their families still hold that power." Ethan rubbed his temples, the pressure of leadership pressing against him. "So we're caught in the middle. If we keep digging, we risk more than just collapsing walls. We risk crossing people who have something to lose." Caleb's eyes were firm, unyielding. "Then we stand our ground. We've already come too far to back out." The room fell into silence, the only sound the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Each of them felt the weight of invisible eyes pressing from the shadows. They weren't just explorers anymore. They were intruders in a story someone had tried very hard to bury. And the deeper they dug, the clearer it became. Obstacles weren't just in the earth beneath their shovels. They were in the living, breathing town around them. Ethan sat alone at his father's old desk that night, the dim light of the lamp casting long shadows across the room. He had pulled out boxes of family papers, things he hadn't touched since the funeral. Receipts, land maps, faded photographs, all pieces of a man who had worked the soil his entire life. Ethan flipped through them aimlessly until one yellow document made his heart stop. It was a survey map from 1952, drawn in his father's careful handwriting. The boundaries matched the farmland near Mill Creek Road, the very ground where the buried house now sat. Scribbled in the margin were words Ethan had never noticed before. Construction halted, too much trouble, never speak of it again. Ethan pressed the paper flat with shaking hands. His father had known, maybe even been part of the effort that buried the house. The realization twisted his stomach, leaving a bitter taste in his mouth. The next morning, when he met Marcus and Caleb at the site, he couldn't keep it in. He pulled the map from his truck and laid it across the hood. This was my dad's. He worked this land before it was sold off. He knew about the house. Marcus leaned over the paper, eyes wide. Ethan, this proves the house existed before the records were erased. Your father must have been connected somehow. Caleb studied Ethan's face more than the document. And how do you feel about that? Ethan's voice cracked, despite his effort to steady it. Like I've been betrayed. My dad spent his whole life preaching about honesty, about respecting the land. And here's proof he knew about this, and chose silence. Marcus placed a hand on his shoulder. Maybe he didn't have a choice. If the people behind this were powerful, he could have been protecting you. Protecting your family. The thought settled heavily between them. Ethan wanted to believe it, but doubt gnawed at him. Or maybe he was part of it. Maybe he helped bury the truth. The wind picked up, rustling the dry stalks at the edge of the field. Caleb finally spoke, his voice low and deliberate. You're not your father. Whatever choices he made, they don't define you. But you have a choice now, to keep digging or to let it die the way he did. Ethan stared at the house half swallowed by earth, its silent walls daring him to step closer. The weight of legacy pressed on him harder than the soil ever could. That evening, Marcus retreated to the library once more, digging deeper into town records. He cross-referenced land transfers, census reports, and school rosters from the early 50s. The gaps in the records grew more glaring with every page. Entire families vanished between one year and the next, as though erased from existence. Claire joined him, sliding a stack of copies across the table. Look at this. Names that appear in church records but nowhere else. Families who donated, who taught Sunday school, and then gone. No obituaries, no sales records, just vanished. Marcus tapped the page with his pen, his voice urgent. This isn't negligence, it's a cover-up. They didn't just bury the house, they buried the people who lived in it. Meanwhile, Ethan drove back to his father's grave, the map folded tightly in his hand. He stood in silence for a long time, the evening air cool against his skin. Why didn't you tell me? He whispered. Why did you carry this and leave me with the pieces? His throat ached, but no answer came, only the stillness of the cemetery. When he returned to the farmhouse, Caleb was waiting on the porch. Ethan sat beside him, exhaustion etched deep into his features. Caleb spoke quietly without looking at him. You're not alone in this. Whatever truth we uncover, we face it together. Ethan nodded slowly, his chest heavy yet steadier. For the first time he realized this was no longer just about history. It was personal, woven into his own bloodline, his own past. And there would be no peace until he uncovered the full truth. The three men returned to the buried house with a new urgency, their shovels slicing through the packed earth with steady rhythm. Ethan carried the weight of his father's secret, Marcus burned with restless determination, and Caleb's watchful silence held them together like mortar between bricks. They weren't just digging for answers anymore. They were digging for redemption, justice, and closure. Inside the house, the air felt heavier than before, as though their presence stirred something long asleep. Marcus wandered into a narrow hallway, his flashlight catching on warped picture frames and peeling wallpaper. He tried each door until one opened into a small bedroom. Dust rose in thick clouds as he stepped inside, illuminating a cedar chest pushed against the far wall. "Over here," Marcus called, his voice tight with excitement. Ethan and Caleb joined him, their boots creaking against the wooden floorboards. Caleb knelt and examined the chest, running his hand over its surface. The lock had rusted away, fragile as paper. With one firm pull it snapped free. Inside lay quilts, neatly folded children's clothes, and at the bottom, a leather-bound book. Marcus reached for it with trembling hands, brushing off layers of dust. The cover was cracked, the edges frayed, but the initials stamped faintly in gold were still visible. M.E. Ethan's chest tightened. "Margaret Ellis," he whispered. Marcus opened the journal carefully, the brittle pages whispering like autumn leaves. The handwriting inside was elegant but rushed, as though written under pressure. He read aloud, his voice steady despite the weight of the words. April 3rd, 1953. They came again today. Said we must sell the land, that we'll regret it if we refuse. William says we'll stand our ground, but I feel fear in his voice. The children don't understand why we keep the curtains drawn. Ethan's hand curled into a fist. His father's map flashed in his mind, the words, "Never speak of it again." The connection grew clearer with every line. Marcus turned the page. April 19th, 1953. Threats grow louder. The sheriff does not listen. He says we should stop causing trouble. William fears they will do something drastic. I told him we must leave, but he says this house is our life. He will not abandon it. The room seemed to shrink around them, the weight of history pressing closer. Caleb's jaw clenched, his voice low. She was documenting everything. Whoever buried this house didn't just want the family gone, they wanted her words gone too. Marcus flipped to the final entries. May 2nd, 1953. I hear trucks at night. They watch the house. William keeps the shotgun by the door. The children ask if we are in danger. I cannot lie anymore. Yes, we are. His voice faltered as he read the last words scrawled hastily across the page. If someone finds this, know that we did not go willingly. Remember us. Remember this house. The silence that followed was suffocating. Ethan stared at the journal, his chest burning with anger and grief. They knew they were being erased. Marcus closed the book gently, his fingers lingering on the worn cover. This is proof. Her words survived, even when everything else was buried. They tried to silence her, but they failed. Caleb's gaze swept the room, his voice hard. Proof or not, it's dangerous. If anyone learns we have this, they'll come for it. We need to decide whether we protect it or expose it. Ethan looked at the journal, then at the photograph on the mantel in the other room, the family smiling as though unaware of the storm closing in. He felt the pull of responsibility stronger than ever. This wasn't just history. It was injustice preserved in soil and silence, waiting for them to speak. And for Ethan, the question no longer was if they should reveal the truth, but how much it would cost them to do so. The journal lay open on Ethan's kitchen table, its fragile pages lit by the dim glow of a single lamp. Each word seemed to echo louder than the next, filling the room with Margaret Ellis's voice, as though she were still present, demanding to be remembered. Ethan sat hunched forward, elbows pressed against the table, while Marcus paced restlessly and Caleb leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Claire sat among them, pen tapping against her notebook, her sharp gaze flicking between the men. Marcus's voice was urgent, almost pleading. This is it. This is the missing piece we've been searching for. Margaret's journal ties everything together. The threats, the land dispute, the silence that followed. We can't just keep this hidden. Ethan rubbed his forehead, his voice heavy with conflict. And what happens when we put it out there? Do you think the people who buried a house and erased a family from records are going to stand by while we expose them? If my father was afraid enough to stay silent, what chance do we have? Claire leaned forward, her tone precise and cutting. Your father may have been trapped in his time, but this isn't the 1950s anymore. We have tools, platforms, ways to share information they can't control. If you hide this, you become part of the silence. If you expose it, you honor Margaret's last words. Caleb's voice cut through, low and steady. But exposure comes with consequences. People get hurt when truth threatens power. I've seen it before. We can't be reckless with this. Marcus stopped pacing, his notebook clutched to his chest. Reckless? Caleb, she begged whoever found her words to remember her, to tell the truth. Are we really going to argue about self-preservation when a family was buried alive, metaphorically and literally? Ethan's jaw tightened. He wanted to believe Marcus's passion, but fear lingered. He looked at Claire, searching for an anchor. What do you think they'll do if this goes public? She didn't flinch. Try to discredit you first, then intimidate you, maybe worse. But the bigger the story, the harder it is for them to bury it again. That's why they came in suits pretending to be county officials. They wanted to scare you off before you realized what you had. Caleb stepped away from the wall, his eyes sharp. And if we go public, we better be ready for a fight. Because once it starts, there's no going back. The room fell into silence, broken only by the faint hum of the lamp. Ethan stared at the journal, Margaret's words etched into his mind. If someone finds this, know that we did not go willingly. Remember us. He thought of his father, of the map scrawled with warnings, of a man who had chosen silence out of fear. Ethan spoke at last, his voice rough but resolute. I don't want to live in silence, not like he did. Margaret deserves to be remembered. Her family deserves to be remembered. But we need to do this smart, protect the evidence, gather proof, make sure they can't bury it again. Marcus let out a breath of relief, his eyes shining. Then we're agreed. We bring the truth into the light. Caleb gave a slow nod, though his face remained hard. But we prepare for pushback. Because it's coming. Claire closed her notebook with a snap. I'll start tracing land deals, find the names behind the corruption. If Margaret's family was targeted, there will be a trail. Someone profited from their erasure. And when we find that, we'll know exactly who we're up against. Ethan looked around the table, his chest heavy but steadier than before. For the first time, he felt like they weren't just reacting, they were choosing. They weren't just trespassers in a forgotten house. They were witnesses, tasked with carrying the weight of truth into a world that had once conspired to bury it. And as he closed the journal carefully, Ethan knew the time for silence had ended. By the end of the week, the town no longer whispered about the buried house. It argued about it openly. Conversations spilled from the diner booths onto sidewalks, into church halls and across fields where farmers paused their work just to debate. The Ellis family's name resurfaced, dragged out of decades of silence, and with it came fear, anger, and defiance. Ethan walked into the diner one morning, the bell above the door jangling. Heads turned, some with cautious nods, others with narrowed eyes. He sat at the counter, ordered a coffee, and felt the weight of every conversation around him pressing against his back. At a booth nearby, an older farmer spoke sharply to his companion. They should have left it buried. Stirring this up now just hurts people. What good does it do to dig up ghosts? Across the room, a younger man snapped back. It's not ghosts, it's truth. Those people were erased, and we deserve to know why. The clash of voices mirrored the storm inside Ethan's chest. He carried Margaret Ellis's journal in his truck every day, as though keeping it close was both shield and burden. Later, when he met Marcus and Caleb at the site, Claire was already there, recording interviews with locals who had wandered over. Some offered sympathy, others scorn. A middle-aged woman folded her arms tightly as she spoke. You think you're doing good, but you're dragging up things that'll only split this town. My father always said the Ellis family brought trouble on themselves. Marcus's eyes flared. Trouble? They were threatened, harassed, buried alive in silence. How does that make them guilty? The woman shook her head, her voice sharp. You don't understand. Some scars are better left covered, Claire wrote furiously, her expression unreadable. When the woman walked away, Marcus turned to Ethan, frustration etched into every line of his face. How can they not see it? How can they choose ignorance over truth? Ethan's voice was quiet but heavy, because truth isn't simple. For some it means facing their parents, their grandparents, people they've trusted all their lives. If they admit what happened, they admit complicity. Caleb stood with his arms crossed, watching the horizon. And for others, it means losing the comfort of thinking their town was built on decency. Nobody likes to admit they're standing on rotten foundations. That evening, a town meeting was called at the church hall. Ethan, Marcus, Caleb and Claire sat near the front as the room filled with murmurs and shifting feet. The pastor opened with a prayer, but the tension was already thick. A councilman cleared his throat. "We've heard concerns about the excavation on Mill Creek Road. While some believe it's a matter of history, others fear it's creating unnecessary division. We need to decide what's best for this community." An elderly man stood, his cane trembling in his grip. "That house belongs in the ground. My daddy told me not to speak of it, and I never have. Don't dig up things that were buried for good reason." Murmurs of agreement rippled through half the room. Then a young woman rose, her voice clear and firm. "My grandmother told me stories of the Ellis children. She said they vanished overnight. She carried that pain her whole life. If this is finally the truth, then we owe it to them and to ourselves to face it." Applause erupted, clashing with shouts of protest. The room became a storm of voices, some demanding preservation, others insisting on silence. Ethan stood, his voice cutting through the noise. "This isn't about choosing sides. It's about deciding if we value truth over comfort. Margaret Ellis begged not to be forgotten. If we ignore that, then we're complicit in burying her twice." The hall fell into uneasy quiet. Some eyes softened with conviction, others hardened with resistance. But one thing was clear: the town was split down the middle, and Ethan had become a reluctant leader in a battle that reached far deeper than he ever imagined. The night after the town meeting, Ethan couldn't sleep. The voices of the divided hall echoed in his mind, some calling for silence, others demanding truth. He rose before dawn and drove back to the buried house, headlights cutting through the mist. Sitting in his truck, he held Margaret Ellis's journal tightly, as though her words themselves urged him forward. Marcus arrived not long after, carrying a stack of papers he had copied from the library. He spread them across the hood of his car, his hands shaking with both exhaustion and exhilaration. "Ethan, I found it. The Ellis family was in litigation against Dawson & Sons Development in 1953. They refused to sell their land for a factory expansion. The case disappeared from records mid-trial, like it never happened." Ethan's breath caught. "And Dawson's company. They became the backbone of this town." Before Marcus could reply, Caleb's truck rumbled up the path. He stepped out, his face grim, carrying a tin box caked in dirt. "Found this hidden under the floorboards in the kitchen." He placed it on the truck bed and forced it open with a crowbar. Inside lay deeds, letters, and a packet of receipts stamped with company seals. Marcus skimmed the documents, his eyes widening. This is it, proof that the Ellis family refused payment. Proof that Dawson's company tried to buy them out, and when they couldn't, they buried the evidence along with the house. The weight of it settled like a stone in Ethan's chest. His father's silence, Mr. Dawson's warning, the fear that had gripped the town for decades, all of it traced back to one truth. The Ellis family had stood against corruption, and the price had been erasure. That evening, they returned to Dawson's farmhouse. The old man sat on his porch, cane resting beside him, his gaze distant. Ethan stepped forward, holding the journal and the tin box. "We know the truth now. Margaret's words survived. The documents survived. You can't deny it anymore." For a long moment, Dawson said nothing. His pale eyes flickered with something between resignation and sorrow. Finally he spoke, his voice thin. "I was a young man then. I didn't bury that house, but I knew who did. My father and his partners, men with power, men who thought they owned this town. They silenced the Ellis family because they wouldn't bend." Marcus's voice trembled with anger. "And you stayed quiet all these years." Dawson's gaze dropped. Silence was survival. Speaking meant ruin, or worse. "I carried that shame every day. And now, with my life nearly done, I can't carry it anymore." Ethan's throat tightened. "My father knew too, didn't he?" Dawson nodded slowly. "He was pressured into helping with the cover-up. He hated himself for it, but he had a family to feed. Not all sins are committed out of malice, some are born of fear." The admission struck Ethan like a blow. His father, complicit, not out of cruelty but desperation. The bitterness in his chest shifted into something more complicated, a grief that carried understanding. Claire, who had arrived quietly, stepped forward, her voice resolute. "Then it's time the truth comes out. People need to know what was done, not just to the Ellis family, but to this whole town." Dawson's gaze lifted, and for the first time his eyes softened. "Do it. Tell their story. Don't let them be forgotten again." The four of them stood in silence, the weight of decades pressing down yet lifting all at once. Ethan held the journal close, Margaret's final plea echoing in his heart. They had the proof, the story, and the resolve. Weeks later, the farmland no longer felt like a secret. Excavation crews, historians, and journalists now walked the same soil Ethan, Marcus, and Caleb had first disturbed. The Ellis house stood partially unearthed, stabilized and protected, its rooms preserved for study rather than silence. The air buzzed with voices, cameras, and curiosity, but beneath the noise lay a deeper stillness, the kind that follows when truth finally breaks through decades of shadow. Ethan stood near the porch of the unearthed house, the journal cradled in his hands. He had read it so many times, he could recite Margaret's words from memory, but each time still carried the sting of her plea. For him, this wasn't just history anymore. It was personal, a mirror reflecting his father's silence and his own choice to speak. Marcus joined him, notebook in hand, his face alive with the thrill of discovery, yet softened by reverence. "They're adding the Ellis name back into the town records," he said. "Births, school attendance, even the lawsuit. It's all going to be restored. The erasure is over." Ethan gave a faint nod, his throat tight. "Good. They deserve that." Caleb approached from the field, his steady stride carrying the same quiet authority he always had. He paused beside them, his gaze sweeping over the crowd of outsiders documenting the site. "Funny how people show up once the danger's gone," he muttered. Marcus chuckled softly. "Better late than never." Caleb's expression softened. "You two did something I never thought this town would allow. You dragged its darkest secret into the light. That takes more courage than most men have." Before Ethan could respond, Claire approached, recorder in hand, her voice brisk but warm. "The article goes live tomorrow. National coverage. Margaret Ellis's story is going to reach far beyond this town. People will know her name." Ethan met her eyes, gratitude flickering there. "Thank you for believing in this." Claire shook her head. "Don't thank me. Thank Margaret. She kept her story alive when everyone tried to silence it. You just carried it the rest of the way." The four of them stood in silence for a moment, listening to the hum of conversations around the house. Children from the local school filed past, their teacher explaining the importance of preserving history. For Ethan, that sight struck deeper than anything else. The Ellis family was finally being remembered, not as a problem to bury, but as people who mattered. Later that evening, after the crews had left and the farmland was quiet again, the three men lingered near the house. The sky stretched wide above them, stars pricking the darkness. Ethan rested his hand on the rough wood of the doorway, feeling the weight of 70 years press against his palm. "I used to think my dad failed me by staying silent," he said quietly. "But maybe his silence was the only way he knew to protect us. I won't make that same choice. If truth costs me, so be it." Marcus smiled faintly. "Then you've already done more than he ever could." "You gave Margaret and her family what they asked for." Caleb gave a slow nod. "And you gave this town a chance to heal, even if some don't want it." Ethan looked out over the field, the house behind him, the town ahead. For the first time in years, he felt purpose, not just as a worker, not just as a son, but as a man who had carried truth out of the ground and into the light. And as the night settled around them, he knew this was not an ending but a beginning, of memory, of accountability, of healing. The Ellis family was no longer buried, and neither was the truth. This story, like the house itself, had been hidden too long. But now it lived again. So if you followed their journey this far, don't forget to subscribe for more stories that uncover the extraordinary truths buried just beneath the surface. And before you go, click on the video suggested on your screen. You won't want to miss what comes next.